And that's it. And we're live. And it's all calm and nobody was nearly late to the stream and it's all good. Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Lunchtime is Dicetime with me, Becky Annison.
I guess that's me.
It's you.
You.
Yeah, hi folks, I'm Nick Bate.
I'm Josh Fox. Hello.
And we have some amazing people already in the chat, I can see. Thank you so much for coming. And we have a really interesting discussion. I'm going to get up my notes so I get it exactly right, because we had a whole conversation yesterday about precisely what this discussion was going to be.
Yep.
Hello was cut off. Hello. Right. Where are my notes? Okay, so the title of this episode is Painting Inside the Lines. We're going to be talking about RPGs which are heavy on creative constraints and what we think about them and probably how to get the most out of them, because I say that for everything. So we have, the collective we, the three of us, have been recently playing and reading a bunch of games which are sort of mini games within games. So sort of things from the Firebrands stable, like Once More Into the Void, been reading but not yet playing Yazebas, and part of reading through and playing some of these games, it was really interesting to us how heavy they are on creative constraints, and we should probably define what we mean by creative constraints. I think I would define creative constraints as where a particular part of the world and what you as a character are doing in that world is already prescribed, sort of like the opposite of a sandbox. And we're going to look at where these different games are using the constraints, what that does to the gameplay in them, what interesting stuff it does, and how it's inspiring our current set of design thinking. Did I miss anything?
Don't think so.
No?
Nailed it.
Good. Okay, nailed it. Yes. So I've defined what I mean by creative constraints. Inevitably, Josh will be disagreeing with that in his own head right now. And so I just wanted to invite you and Nick to add anything to what do we mean when we say there's a creative constraint?
Okay, so I guess I'm not going to disagree with you, I don't think, but maybe I'll elaborate on it a bit. I think the standard, the old traditional model of role playing is you have a very well-defined setting with lots of details that are, at least on paper, not up for discussion. But you don't have very well-defined characters. You don't have very well-defined limits on what actions you can take. You don't have very well-defined beats within a scene. And I think what's interesting about some of the games that you mentioned, like the King is Dead that we've been playing recently, Once More Into the Void we're in the middle of, Yazebas, is that they almost invert that. They're kind of saying, well, the setting can be quite vague and you can kind of do what you like with it, but your character is going to be quite crisply defined, and or the types of action you can take and the beats within those actions quite tightly defined, and like more so than a PBTA move. They encompass an entire scene being quite heavily framed and scaffolded.
So I think this goes beyond just pre-generated characters, right? This is not just a bunch of we're not really talking about those cases where you roll up at a con game and you've got a preset list of characters that you're choosing from. It's games that go a bit further than that. They may or may not have pre-generated characters in them. Lady Blackbird hasn't been mentioned yet, but I'm sure it'll come up. But the types of things that they can do and the types of beats I'm really just saying what you said, Josh. Type of beats that they're aiming to hit are more tightly constrained. I am actually going to talk about a PBTA game later, I think, maybe. So
before you get to that, somebody asked a question in the chat that I wanted to throw over to Josh.
Oh yeah, the beats is like cluster.
experience the beats in Slug Blaster, Josh, which you played recently with Doc Dicer.
I did. Yeah, that's an interesting link. I hadn't thought about it. So Slug Blaster, for those who don't know, it's got these things called beats and arcs, which are a sequence of things that your character, like events that your character has in their life, in effect, that have a thread running through them. So, for example, I think I was playing, I've forgotten what they're called. They're like basically the kind of nerd character, and their personal sort of playbook arc is, oh, I'm going to try and invent something. It's going to get messed up and go crazy and probably have bad consequences. And then somehow it's all going to come good in the end. That's the kind of broad shape of it, right? So normally a game would leave you to set that direction for yourself, and certainly not try to choreograph the ordering of it. So I liked it. You know, I did. I liked it more than I thought I would. I kind of feel like that kind of choreography makes life a bit simpler in some ways. What I maybe felt it was missing, and maybe this is something we can discuss in the kind of later part of this, is the option to customize like more than just the details. You know, like that choreographed sequence of beats leaves you with very little discretion as to, oh, actually I want to do something different than just follow that fixed direction, you know.
There's a
But
follow up.
Yeah, definitely fits into this kind of broad category.
And
sure.
The follow up is, did you still feel you had enough freedom within it? And then we'll move on.
I didn't have a lot of freedom, really. Like I think I enjoyed the accepting that I didn't have that freedom and just saying, cool, I want to play this character, I want to enjoy following this particular story. You know, that was fine.
I was going to link that to your zebras, actually, but did you want to say something first, Nick?
I was just going to say this is kind of exactly what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about a role-playing situation where your constraints are much tighter than they might be otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. Is it like, I don't know, I don't want to keep derailing the discussion, Becky, so hammer me if need be, but like I feel like this is really common in LARP. You know, not that long ago, okay, quite a long time ago, a few years ago, we played in a LARP by Mo Holkar with the designer himself on a cottage con holiday. And as I recall, you know, a lot of the characters were predetermined, a lot of the kind of issues that we were going to come up against, and maybe even the kind of interactions that we were going to have were almost pre-scripted. You know, we're still role-playing through it, but quite a lot of it had been determined in advance. And it's just a different experience. You know, it's like role-playing does not have to be all about, oh, I'm making all these choices, all about my autonomy and my precious snowflake vision of my character. Sometimes it's an opportunity to take someone else's vision and say, oh, I'm going to play through that and yeah, color in the lines of that, bring it to life myself.
I mean, I'd say firstly, of course, the brilliant thing is that you can play a game like that and then you can immediately go off the next minute and play an OSR sandbox game, which is completely different, and you don't have to choose one true role-playing. I know this feels a bit heretical to say, but there is no, you know, you don't have to stick to one true role-playing your whole life. And that's probably because I'm like a 90s role player. That's really dating me, isn't it? But like when I started role playing way back when, and when I was really getting into role playing and doing a hell of a lot of it, this idea that you just played D&D and that was it, or you just played PBTA and that was it, that just wasn't even, you know, we played Vampire, we played Champions, we played D&D, we played, you know, it's just, I feel like 90s role-playing culture was just a lot less I don't even know if tribal's the right word, or you know, it just felt like role-playing was the hobby. It wasn't that there were defined mini hobbies within the hobby of the people who play in D&D and the people who only play Vampire and the people who only played this. It felt a lot more, I don't know, cosmopolitan, is that the right word? I don't know. Anyway, that really is a derail. I wanted to talk about your zebras. I've read it. I think it's really interesting. I've yet to play it. And I know that some people in the chat have heard me say I'm a little bit skeptical about how to play it online. which is how I do most of my role playing, which is probably one of the reasons I've not got it to table. I'm worried about how to do it online. But what I'm really intrigued by Yazebas is the idea that not only are there set characters that you play, like pre-gen characters, but they sort of have like pre-gen story arcs, and you don't get access to bits of the story arc until you've completed earlier bits of the story arc. And I'm really, really intrigued by that and how that plays out. In particular, that reminds me a lot of another game which I love the look of and have never managed to work out how to get to the table, which is Chibo's marvelous wish granting engine by Jen Moran, which also has arcs for your character. Although I believe in Chibo's, you design your own character arc that you're going to go through rather than being handed one. So yeah, I just wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
So I think it's really interesting, the idea of unlocking things, like you said. I think one of the things that you don't see a lot of as yet, or at least I haven't, is the idea of branching paths. And that's kind of referring back to what I was saying about Slug Blaster's arcs, but I think it's also true of a lot of games that have little, like, I mean, The Between, for example, has got a set of kind of story type beats that you go through on your XP track, or your, I can't remember what it is now, stress, whatever currency it is. A lot of games are doing this, but they tend to just be a list or a sequence. You don't see a lot of, oh, now that you've got to this stage, you make a choice between multiple pathways, or maybe you can envisage something that gets really complicated, and it becomes kind of like a choose your own adventure book where you're kind of weaving through multiple possible pathways. And I think that'd be super interesting, if like a really hard design challenge.
I did have an idea that I thought was interesting for a sort of hack of Yazebas, where people can play the same character with the same sort of potentially branching, as you've said, Josh, character beats, and they can meet up and play them because it's a multiversal game. So you can see how when you're both playing the same character in the same game, but one of you has branched off in a different direction. And I've no idea how to write that yet, but that's kind of like my idea for what I'm going to write, maybe post Carnival Tenebris. But yeah, there's definitely something I think that could be really interesting with that.
We're both like ready to get into this design space, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and it's come up in the chat as well. Doc Dicer has made a point about watching the same character or the same arc being played more than once by different people, and seeing their interpretations when you're playing in a large community like the Open Hearth. But I mean, without wanting to sound too kind of commercial about all this, I think there is also a marketing benefit here that's exactly that, right? Like, it's actually really fun to sit down and talk to somebody about their interpretation of a character that you've played, that you've met already.
Yes.
And I think in your average, in your kind of traditional role-playing game, there's less opportunity to do that, right? You might have a conversation about the campaign you're playing, or the characters in your campaign, but nobody else knows who they are. They've got no connection there. But if it's somebody you're familiar with already, who might look the same or look different in your game, that's a conversation you can engage with much more easily. And that means people are more likely to talk with each other about the games they've played. And speaking as a designer who has designed a couple of games that have like play sets in them, I know you guys have too, right? It's always interesting hearing about how people have used those play sets, what their version of that looked like. So I think there's I mean, we all know that Yazebas has been really quite successful. And I wonder if part of it is that. Part of it is that you've all got a shared language of characters that you can talk about.
So what? It's interesting. One of my favorite characters, again, I've not played it, but from reading Yazebas, is the little guy who's some kind of little tearaway that's not yet grown up, and their arc
is it called Hey Kid?
Yes, that's right. Hey Kid. So Hey Kid has got an arc which is about growing up, and you kind of get to choose aspect. Like I'm going to fluff this because it's a while since I've read it, but you get to choose aspects of your character that are going to mature, and some of them maybe you kind of mature in a boring way, and some of them you mature in an interesting way, and maybe some don't mature at all. But like what is interesting about that to me is that it does have some choice. It's constrained choice,
Yeah.
but it is choice more than just you're going to invent a thing, so you get to decide what the thing is. Then the invention you've made is going to go out of control, and you decide how it went out of control, and then it will get better again, and you decide how it gets better, which is obviously does leave a huge amount of space for expression and variation and creativity. But actually being like, oh, my Hey Kid grew up in this way, and mine grew up in this way, that are actually quite different from each other. I think that's quite fun, and I'd like to see a bit more like that, personally.
I was just going to say that one of the, delving a little bit deeper into Yazebas, and then we should probably move on to Once More Into the Void, since we just started playing it. But the other thing I found really interesting about Yazebas is this this idea that if you're playing Hey Kid, that you're going to be eventually growing up, and that's your arc. But there'll be elements of stories that you're going to play through in a session. And they are going to have their own little mini game system attached to that story, because it's a collection of mini games game like Once More and all the Firebrands family. Although it's not the Firebrand system, it's a different system. But what I thought was so interesting is that until you have played through these little chapters of story, you can't unlock these little chapters of story, but they're there. You can see that they're coming up on the horizon, and it's that kind of sense of, if I get enough ticks, then I get access to this new cool story. And it felt like a really different way of doing experience, if you know what I mean. It's like, if it's experience, I accumulate these ticks, and then I get this cool new power. And I like this. I accumulate these ticks, completed chapters, and now I open up a new chapter that I can I'm working towards it, and I can see it's there, and I'm looking forward to it. And I thought that was quite cool.
I've got a question about that, actually, Becky. Having never read Yazebas,
I've never played it, so I might have to refer to somebody in the comments.
Yeah, or the chat. My question is, how much of this stuff do you see on the horizon? So if I'm a player who's sitting down at the table and I have not read the book, so I don't know what's coming down.
Yeah, probably not.
Is there okay? So there's nothing on the kind of sheet that I'm working with or whatever that hints at the future.
Oh, I think there might. It's a long time since I've read it myself, actually. I'm going to refer to. So Doc Dicer says it depends on how much of the tome you want to read.
Yeah, okay. That's
it's a tome, but as Josh is probably going to leap in and say, it's a tome with an awful lot of art and an awful lot of white space. So it's not as much of a tome as you think it is.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of little thought experiment about how the kind of information design might change your experience of play. Because if the information design doesn't hint at those things in the future, you might know that there are things that this is a game in which you can unlock things, but there's no foreshadowing there. You don't know what's coming until it arrives. Versus a game where you do know what's coming. I guess maybe Lady Blackbird is more like the second thing, in that you've got a bit more of a sense for the direction the characters are headed in from the sheet that you're holding in your hands.
Well, maybe this is the time that we talk about Once More Into the Void and The King is Dead, because you absolutely know where the story is ending up in both of those. You know what the finale is going to be. From the get-go, from the start of the game. You know Once More Into the Void, you know what that final story playthrough is. King is Dead, you know it's going to be who's going to take the final battle to see who's going to take the throne, and you're building up to it all the way through, not on a personal character level, but on a collective, this is where our group is driving the story towards level.
Yeah, and I suppose that's part of the reason the purpose the mini games in those games are serving is to provide you with beats along the road to that finale. You just have much more control over which beats hit when.
And then they're much smaller. Like I think that's just one thing. This is kind of neither a plus or a minus, really, but both Once More Into the Void and The King is Dead, they've got, I guess, under a dozen mini games, so you can quite easily glance over them all. You can quite easily read them all if you want to without putting too much time in, and so therefore you can start to envisage potential arcs that you might go through, and everyone can know what that end point is. Whereas that's probably not the case for Yazebas, because I don't know exactly how many chapters there are, but it's kind of maybe
I feel
30
like
plus.
Yazebas is more about driving the characters to a particular endpoint, whereas Once More and King is Dead are about driving the collective story between the characters to a particular endpoint.
That poses another question for me, having just played The King is Dead and starting Once More Into the Void. As I was playing those games, I always knew the particular end that was in sight. But in terms of the minigame that came next, I was always thinking reactively. So I was only ever thinking, what is a logical next thing? I was never thinking further ahead than that.
I was.
You were? Okay, that's interesting.
I was desperate. So this is one of the downsides for me that have games within games in them. I knew there was an end finale. I knew that collecting certain cards would make it more or less likely I would do well in the end finale, and that a little part of my brain that is a competitive board gamer gets very, very distracted by trying to optimize the strategy for that. And that's one of the reasons I kind of struggle a little bit with games that have that as a mechanic, because I want to be sitting there enjoying the juicy story, and there's so much juice in both King is Dead and Once More Into the Void, and it's very hard for me to kind of damp down the desire to be collecting the good cards and to throw certain things for the story. So one of the reasons that I, as much as there's many things about it that I like, it's one of the reasons I've struggled a lot with Drugs in the Vineyard, because there's a very, very strategy-based dice mechanic in it about raising with dice and things like that, and my brain just goes, oh, okay, we're playing a board game now. Well, forget all that character stuff. I'm here to win.
We'll need to circle back after we've played Once More Into the Void, because you can't do that in Once More Into the Void in the same way as you do in The King is Dead. In The King is Dead, there's a kind of card-based mini game that you're sort of playing while you're playing the mini games, trying to build up the sorts of cards you need to take the throne or whatever you choose for your character at the end. Whereas in Once More Into the Void, it's essentially a set of random draws that will impact the finale.
Yeah.
But there's no strategy there, so
not much.
True. Yes, not much.
There's a tiny bit.
Yeah.
And well, also, yeah. So, but I think what you've just said is all correct, and it's quite interesting to talk about how interventionist the mechanics should be, and how much it should be important to make the right choices to get what you want mechanically. But I think there's also like the question as to what choices can I make fictionally to get what I want, like to set up the kind of interesting arc that I want to see. Right. So both of those games have got a kind of romance mini game in them, and it's going to make a huge difference to how that romance mini game feels, whether you jump into it. Number one, it's my first scene that I do right away, or whether I build up some stuff towards it and then do it later, or whether I try and do one early that I deliberately sabotage and then come back to it later to build some tension. And that kind of stuff is not super apparent on the face of it, I don't think. Like, I think it would have been quite good to have a little tags or something that says, oh, play this if you want to create some angst or
right.
distrust between you and this other character. That's kind of what are these games doing for me, and you only find out really by reading the game in full or by playing it. And then and we certainly had the experience. You play the game, you make some choices, you get out the other end, and you go, I made the wrong choices there. Like I might have made different choices if I had played this game previously, because you do feel a little bit like, oh, I've driven my car off in a particular direction and I cannot now turn back. Fictionally, not mechanically.
which raises a whole bunch of questions about information design. I think how you communicate the contents of mini games, for example, or as we were discussing, and there's a bit more in the chat about story arcs for individual characters. I think this is also true for one of the things about constraint heavy games, I think, is that there can be a lot of pieces that make up those constraints. So thinking back to The King is Dead, when you start the game, you choose which house your character is from. You make a few sort of light touch decisions about who your character is, but if you kind of flip all the way to the back of the book, there is actually quite a lot of detail about each of the houses, what their assets are, what sort of things they have access to, what kind of people they are as a house, and a lot of that information. I mean, it's there in the back of the book, but there is nothing in the setup process that foregrounds any of it. And so it's easy to miss on one level, but then I think there's also a risk that kind of information, when it becomes relevant, feels a bit less kind of weighty.
Yes, that's fair.
It's sort of sprung out of nowhere in the moment that you reached for it.
Yeah, it's kind of a game wanting a character sheet, actually. I didn't think of this when we were playing it, but I think had we each had a little sheet in front of us with your house and some relevant information on it, that could have been quite good for doing that, for foregrounding those. And I think similarly, we sort of the version that I've got of The King is Dead has got some location cards, which do a little bit of this, but I definitely felt like I wanted a map, because the geography of the place felt like it should be important, but there isn't anything that foregrounds that either. And I think to a certain extent that's a deliberate choice. Like, I know Zebras, for example, is designed to be played as a kind of, you're dipping in, you're dipping out. Your group might play the same mini game with 3 different casts, and they're just sort of different realizations of almost like a rebooted version of that chapter in the story. So that deliberately leaving that freedom so you're not tied down by having a load of predefined stuff on the table in front of you. But there are also advantages to having that stuff on the table in front of you, so that it, as you say, it has weight and impact.
It's a real art. There's a needle that needs to be threaded there, I think. Not to overwhelm somebody when they first sit down.
And the problem is, of course, is it's going to be a different for everybody. Everybody's going to need slightly down, because I've talked before about how I can't really go completely from a cold start and just imagine everything from whole cloth. I want to have a few details to kind of hook into, but I don't think I need as much as other people, but I need more than other people. So I think that's the problem as well. It's not even a needle, is it? So it's a dial, which is different for each person. I wanted to talk a little bit, if I could, about having about the minigame aspect. I know this is supposed to be creative constraints, and we basically just talked about the minigame game. But I think it's because it's such a rich, interesting space. One of the things that I'm really intrigued by is this: when you're doing this interaction, you use this set of mechanics, and when you are doing this interaction or this chapter of the story, you use completely different mechanics, and we just forget about those older mechanics, and now we're doing with some completely different mechanics. And that, I think, is really interesting and a really interesting design space. Now, as Dicer has pointed out, in your Zebras, it's pretty much just there's like 4 sets of mechanics that you just recycle and slightly reskin for each of the chapters. That's not the case, I think, in The King is Dead and Once More Into the Void. I think there is recycling going on, but I think it's a bit more. Is that right?
I mean, a lot of it is lists of beats.
So
like, if you think about belonging outside belonging games, or at least the ones I've read, you often have a kind of list of things that your character can do, and they are quite concrete actions, like I don't know, make a big scene and embarrass somebody, right?
Yeah.
And then this is like the moves version of that. So an entire scene comes with a set of those things that you can do and that you get to choose from, and that menu defines what that type of scene can be, right? And it is effectively, they're all kind of not necessarily exactly the same mini game, but a lot of them are quite similar in that it's just kind of, take turns to pick a thing from a list, but the content of the list is so different that it completely alters the mouthfeel of the scene.
I mean, you can do this with sort of. You can do this with dice mechanics too. Like you can. There's a lot of things you can do with a small pile of 6-sided dice, for example, and each of those things has a bit of a different feel. I feel like doing that sort of thing is on the kind of gentle end of the thing where a Firebrands game sits on the far other extreme.
Yeah, I think they just do really radically different things, though, because with Firebrands, and you have, like Josh says, you've got your lists of moves you can make which hit the narrative in a particular way. But on the other side, you've got the mini game, the kind of the real hard randomization element. What I was reminded of, and I know this is not exactly a mini game, it's an anthology of mini games, but Playing Nature's Year, which I have read and played quite a few of the games in Playing Nature's Year, also by Meg Baker, who co-wrote The King is Dead, and they're wildly different mechanics in each of those tiny little seasonal mini games. And most of them are dice, as I recall. I think there's one which is where you have to go out for a walk, which I always like the sound of, but it was the one we never managed to do. And I had this kind of very vague plan at one point with Ed, our Ed from the pod, that he was going to run some of the mini games from Playing Nature's Year, but I would create a framing game where we were all playing characters from Under Hollow Hills. Not that we're big Baker fans or anything, but we would create characters from Under Hollow Hills, also by the Bakers. But then instead of playing the Under Hollow Hills game, we would just play mini games from Playing Nature's Year, but play them as our characters. And for various different reasons, we never managed to get it off the ground. But that I was super intrigued by, like having a completely wildly different mechanic. I wonder if there's an interesting way to marry the two, or is that overkill?
I mean, I think, yeah, like I think some people get really excited by differing sort of physical mechanics. Like, so something feels really different if you're rolling a big pool of dice versus if you've got a hand of cards versus if you're collecting tokens or something. But obviously it does mean there's a lot more to learn. And the nice thing about open up a page, it's got some prompts on it, is that it isn't, which has just made me think, by the way, this is a slight tangent from what you were saying, Becky, but I've just been looking at my shelf and spotted 1,000-Year-Old Vampire. And of course, that is really very much in this space. It's the same kind of, here are some really quite specific prompts and they're arranged in an order, and you're not going to go through them necessarily just straightforwardly in order, but you kind of, the maths of the system pushes you in a particular direction through the prompts, in little kind of fits and starts. You make your way, usually I think numerically, forward through this long list of prompts, and that's so sort of common, I would say. Like, that's a relatively commonplace approach for solo journaling games, perhaps because 1,000-Year-Old Vampire is a very influential solo journaling game, but it is much less commonplace to do that for like a group TTRPG, and I wonder where that's the influence is coming from a little bit. Is kind of solo journaling games did that a lot, and then along comes something like Zebras and says, oh well, we could do that, but for more traditional TTRPG.
Interesting. I'm mindful of time. Does anybody have any last thoughts before we'll move on to our critical hit or critical fail for the fortnight?
I'd like to talk more about the intrusiveness of the mechanics of The King is Dead and what do you call it? Dogs in the Vineyard. I think that's quite an interesting seam of how you make those mechanics kind of impact you without becoming distracting. It's quite good. It's not quite.
I mean, it might just be me, Josh. It might just be a quirk of my psychology. So
good. Yeah, people can disagree. Done.
Yeah, and I'm just going to sit here saying information design over and over and over again. So everyone gets sick of it.
Just hold up the sign.
Yeah.
The button for you to press, the information design button.
Yep.
Maybe we should do a session on information design.
Maybe we should.
10 sessions on information design.
Yeah.
Right, okay. We've got 4 minutes left before we are officially over time, because this is a 30 to 40 minute session. I see what you say there, Doc Dicer, about extending it to 60 minutes, but I'm going to try and keep it at 40 minutes. Critical hit for the fortnight, or critical fail if you've had a very bad time of it recently.
Shall I do?
Yeah, go, Josh.
Go, Josh.
We went to see Gladiators. So I don't know if anybody knows this. My sister was really surprised to discover this. The Gladiators TV show from the 80s is like back on the telly and has been for a while.
4 years.
Yeah, I know, but she didn't know. So I guess some people don't know. And they record it quite near to us. So we put ourselves in. They do kind of a lottery thing where you put yourselves in to get free tickets. And we got free tickets and we went to see it live and it was very cool. But it was also 8 hours long. Turns out to make 1 hour of telly, you need 8 hours of people sitting in a big stadium. So good.
Oh, you should watch it, Seeds. It is a lot of fun. I think as long as you keep in mind that Gladiators is intended to be, I described it to someone else the other day as sports panto.
Yes,
which is not to denigrate from how sporty it really was. It's very sporty, but it's like sports panto, and the people who approach it like it's panto get the most out of it.
Yeah, and of course, Seeds has just recently played Gladiators 2050, my Gladiator game.
Seeds.
Which, it sounded like it went really well, and I highly recommend spending an afternoon making up silly gladiators and silly games, and then killing people with them.
Go, Nick.
I was going to say at some point one of us will come up with a critical fail. I think we're just naturally positive people or something.
At least we just don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. Mine is actually a game. Talking about and thinking about games that impose heavier than usual creative constraints had me digging back through my back catalogue for a copy of Escape from Dino Island by Sam Tung and Sam Roberts, because it occurred to me after the fact that I think it might be one of these. It's a PBTA game, but there's a very specific thing that you're setting out to do. The DM, the Dino Master, has a very specific job that they're going to do towards the end of the game, and each of the playbooks has a set of beats that you're going to hit. They're broader than maybe they are in something like Slug Blaster, say, but you're still going to see the same sets of questions come up for each playbook each time you play it. So it's a masterpiece of PBTA design, and it is one of my lasting shames that I've never played it. So see if I can fix that sometime soon.
Yeah, run it for us.
Yeah.
What's my critical hit? It is that I have nearly finished reading all the Hugo books that I plan to read before the voting deadline. I've got one graphic novel to go, which is the graphic novel of Wisdom of Earthsea. And my top pick from everything I've read from the Hugos so far is The Everlasting by Alex Harrow. I know you haven't read it yet, Nick. I think
on the list.
It's really, really, really good. And that's going to be my top vote for winning the novel category. Even though there's some really good stuff in the novel category, it's going to be The Everlasting for me. So spoilers, everybody. That's what I'm voting for. think that's it. We're just under the wire of 40 minutes, so I'm going to say goodbye. Who else is going to say
goodbye?
No, I refuse to say goodbye. I'm staying here forever.
We'll see you next time, folks.
See you in 2 weeks,
I'll
everybody.
still be here. Bye.